Okay, so welcome everyone, and I'm very happy to introduce Fiona Thomas, who is the presenter of this webinar on communicating with students and clients. And well, I'll leave it there, and I hope that you enjoy the webinar. Um, Go ahead, Fiona. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Hi, everybody. It's very, very nice to be here today with you all. My name is Fiona Thomas, and I currently manage an online language school. So since 2001, I've had a lot of experience dealing with different students and clients from lots and lots of different countries all around the world, and had a lot of very interesting experiences in terms of communication quite often breaking down with those students and clients. So it's an area that's fascinated me for a long time, and it's an area that I'm striving to improve on. So I thought today I would share with you what I've learned about why communication breaks down so frequently with students and clients, and probably more importantly, what we can do about it, what we can do to make communication with our students and clients as effective as possible. Now, you'll notice that I distinguish between students and clients. For me, students are people who study our courses, and clients are people who pay for the courses. So obviously they can be the same person, but you can quite often get clients who are, for example, training managers in a company who contract your services, your language school's services, but they aren't necessarily doing the course. Same, for example, as well with parents of kids that study with you. But it's obviously very important to communicate well with both groups. Okay, so I've broken down this webinar into 3 parts. In the first part, what we're going to look at is, in my experience, what affects our ability to communicate effectively with our students and clients. In fact, George Bernard Shaw said the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Yeah? And then from there, we're going to move on to look at what we can do to make communication with our students and clients more effective. And to do that, I'm going to tell you about a tool that I use a lot, which for me makes a massive difference to how effectively I communicate with my students and clients. And I'm also going to remind you of something which I think is very important in terms of communicating effectively. And then we're going to end by looking at the importance of reflecting on how well we are communicating and on getting feedback about how well we're communicating. Okay? So, to begin, what can interfere with effective communication? Well, for me, one very important aspect is that of student and client expectations. Now, this is a quote from one of our students on our online course. Now, this student said, "If I am doing an online course, I expect my tutor to be available 24/7 and at 2 o'clock in the morning if that's what I want." Now, there are online courses that do provide a sort of 24-hour call center, but that's not what we do. We assign each student their own individual teacher to work with them throughout the length of the course. So obviously that teacher is not going to be available 24/7 and definitely not at 2 o'clock in the morning. And there is nothing on our website, in our literature, in our promotional information that would ever say that. But this student was convinced that this was something that they were entitled to. So why was that? Why do people expect things that we are not going to deliver? And I find this very interesting, and I think there are different reasons for this. I think one of the reasons is that their expectations are quite often based on their experience of other language courses. A lot of your students, your clients, will have done other language courses with other language organizations, language teaching organizations. And inevitably, their experience with those language teaching organizations is going to be different from the experience they're going to have with your language teaching organizations. But their expectations are going to be governed by what they've experienced until now. So I think that's one thing that influences their expectations. Another is, of course, what friends and relatives say. You can just imagine students saying, oh, I'm going to study English in this language school, or I'm going to study English online, and friends and relatives will say, oh, yes, that's a great idea. Of course, what's very important is that the language school does this, and that you're taught in this way, etc. People are very wise about how people should learn and how they should be taught. So that will influence their expectations. They're going to definitely be based on things they've seen in social media, on television, in advertisements. That will influence their expectations. And I think most importantly, probably, is their expectations are based on their experience to date in education in general. In other words, what they've experienced influence what they think the role of a learner is and what the role of a teacher is. And these cognitions, these expectations in terms of what teaching is all about and learning is all about are very, very strong and very difficult to change. So I think it's very important to be aware that your students and your clients will come to your language school with a whole series of expectations about what they're going to experience and over which you will have very little control. But it's important to be aware that they exist. So that's one thing, I think, which influences your ability to communicate effectively with your students, because despite what you're saying, these expectations sometimes are so strong that they completely override anything you're saying. Okay, so the next point. For me, I find this fascinating. This is about the difference, the importance of national and regional cultural differences. Now, I think in our world of the language teaching world, one thing that's wonderful is that we deal with people from different cultural and national backgrounds, people learning English. But this can affect how we communicate with students. And Gert Hofstede, he defines national culture as those things that are shared by people who grew up in the same forest. Now, he is a person who carried out research in the 1960s, 1970s. And what he wanted to discover if there was actually such a thing as national and regional cultural differences. Now, in order to do this, he got an agreement with IBM, and he studied the way people behaved in 70 countries around the world. But all the people he was studying worked for the same company, for IBM. So the corporate culture, the work culture, was going to be the same in all the different offices. So by doing that, he was limiting the differences to what he could consider to be national and regional cultural differences. And he, in fact, because of his research, discovered that there are very definite differences between national cultures around the world. And this was really brought home to me about 3 years ago, when the language school I work for signed an agreement with an organization, a college of higher education in Angola, in Luanda. And it was a very big deal. And as part of the deal, I had to go out and train the English language teachers on how to use our online materials. Now, for different reasons, it was very difficult to get me a visa to go to Angola. So we agreed that the most practical solution was for us all to fly to Cape Town in South Africa and to organize the training there. So I prepared my 4-day training in my very British way, which was to think about, okay, all the things that these English teachers I thought would need to know about our online course material to use with their students. So we all met up in Cape Town, and this is a photo of these lovely, lovely people. But the problem was, of these people, and there were 2 more people than the people you can see in these photos, only 2 of them had a B2 level of English. 2 of them were working in the technical department. The second woman in from the left, she was a lovely woman. She was a grandmother who was there because she was maybe interested in finding out about our language courses for her grandchildren. So of course this completely threw me. And everything I'd prepared was obviously not at all suitable for this group of people. And looking back at it afterwards, I went actually onto the Goethe Hofstede website. It's a very interesting website where you can actually compare national cultural differences between countries. So I put in Angola and the United Kingdom. Now you can see here, he came up basically with 6 different categories, and he scored countries on these categories. Now they're not categories to say some country is better or worse. They're just scoring on how important certain things are in those different categories. So if you look at the second category, that of individualism, you can see the darker grey, that's Angola, scored 18 out of 100. Whereas in the United Kingdom, the British scored 89 out of 100. So you can see there immediately how incredibly different our cultures are. The individual is very important in the United Kingdom, whereas Angola, it is pretty insignificant. What's important is the group. And you could see that with these wonderful people. They were really looking after each other. They were checking that everybody was okay, which was very, very, very nice. In the next category, masculinity, if you score high on masculinity, that basically means that you're a very competitive culture. So you can see there again that in Angola, they're not a particularly competitive culture. So they weren't striving to be the best in the class or to learn the most. And you can see in the final category, they scored very, very high on indulgence, which is about the importance of having a good time. And so this group of very nice people, they were all about going out, having a good time, being on Facebook in my sessions. So as you can imagine, it was difficult. And it took me about 2 days to get my head around this. And on reflection, I sort of think if I had thought about this a little bit more before I organised a training session and thought more about the possible issues I could have because of the cultural differences, then I would have been a lot better prepared to communicate effectively with these students. And then, of course, we have the very obvious language issues of dealing with people from different L1s. If we're communicating,
there is too much butter on those trays.
No, senor, not on those trays. No, sir. Uno, dos, tres.
Hay mucho burro allí.
Okay?
Hay mucho burro allí.
Ah, mantequilla.
What? Okay?
Mantequilla. Burro is burro.
Manuel, por favor, momento.
Sí.
Nothing, dear, I'm just dealing with it.
He speak good, how you say?
English.
Mantequilla. Solamente dos.
Dos.
Well, don't look at me. You're the one who's supposed to be able to speak it.
2 pieces, 2 each. Arriba, arriba!
Oh, I don't know why you wanted to hire him, Basil.
Because he's cheap and keen to learn, dear, and in this day and age...
But why did you say you could speak the language?
I learned classical Spanish, not the strange dialect he seems to have picked up.
Be quicker to train a monkey.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so very obviously there are language issues, but language issues aren't just restricted to L1 and L2. There's also something which I like to think of as being TEFL talk, or we talk a type of technical language. And this is a little extract from something that, to my shame, I sent to a representative that we have, which is really not very clear at all, because it's using technical language, which is very specific to the context where I work. So let's see. What I'd like to do is offer you an annual credit system. If we did this, we could sell you, for example, 1,000 credits to use in a year. Each credit is a student with access to a certain course or courses to be selected from a different equivalent course groupings we define. Now, obviously, for me that makes perfect sense, but it is not going to make sense to somebody who doesn't understand our complicated credit system. And it's the same when we talk between ourselves about when we use linguistic terms that are specific to teaching English as a foreign language. And I think quite often, without realizing it, we use them when we talk to our clients and our students, and of course they don't necessarily speak that language or need to speak that language, and that causes breakdowns in communication. And then of course there are lots of other factors. There are things which we assume, and often incorrectly, we assume, and I think everybody knows this, that when you send out an email to students, to clients, to teachers, that they have read it. And when we know so often that's not true, we assume things like if you're working with a corporate client, that if the training manager changes, that new training manager will have been brought up to speed by the previous training manager. I think it's safe to say always assume that emails haven't been read, that documents haven't been read, and that people haven't been brought up to speed, because it's very dangerous to assume otherwise. And that can lead to serious breakdowns in communication. There's also the concept of what I call Chinese whispers, which I think is specific to a lot of language teaching organizations. I think a lot of students that go and study in language teaching organization, language schools, don't necessarily come directly to the school, but come via agents, especially if they're studying abroad. And of course, the more middle people there are, the more likely it is that the message about what they're going to be receiving in terms of the service, the teachers, the classes, etc., it's more likely to become distorted with the more middle people there are. Then there's also a very important issue, I think, which is the issue of timing. If you provide students with and clients with the information that they need when they need it, then they're highly likely to listen to you, and you're going to be able to communicate effectively with them, because they are going to want to listen to what you have to say, because it's important for them to know what you're saying. However, I think what tends to happen is at the beginning of any course or any contract with a client or students are given everything. They're given a handbook which includes everything they could possibly ever want to know about the language school, the language teaching organization, and it's almost as if the manager, the person responsible for communicating this, for doing this, thinks, okay, that's it. I've told them everything they need to know. They have somewhere to go and to consult and to find the information they need. Now, in my opinion, the likelihood is they won't remember that they have that handbook, or they won't know to go there when they need the information they need. So giving them loads of information that at a time when they don't necessarily need it will mean that they probably, you won't be communicating effectively with the student. And related to that is this idea of information overload, which is giving students too much information so that they don't actually see the important points. I know from experience with our online students, when I send them their welcome email with their codes, there is no point in putting anything else in that welcome email, because that email I send to them is all they're going to see is their access codes. They're not going to look at anything else, because what they want to do is to go into the platform and get into their course. So putting anything else in there, it's highly unlikely that they'll read it. So that those are a lot of things that have happened to me that have caused breakdowns in communication. They're issues that I've come up against. Now I'm sure you probably have had similar or maybe different experiences. So I thought it would be interesting to see what you think are the most important reasons, or what the most important reason is why you think communication breaks down with your students and with your clients. So Andy is sharing now with you a poll on which what I'd like you to do is to vote and decide on which of these reasons you think is the most important reason for communication breaking down. So what you need to do is just select the reason that you think is the most important. If you don't agree with any of those, you think it's something else, click on Other instead. Okay? That's interesting. Expectations, our assumptions. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Okay. I think we've broadcast those results. Can you see those results? So we've currently got a tie between expectations, our assumptions, and timing. Okay, that's interesting. And what I'd like to know is, do you think there are any other reasons for communications breaking down? Maybe you could type in the chat window if you can think of other reasons why communication breaks down. Do you think of any other reasons, or do you think that's covered them all? Okay, nothing else to add. Okay, that's fine then. Okay, so that's sort of the end of the first part, looking at the reasons why communications can break down. So now we're going to move into the second part, which is looking at what we can do to make communication more effective. Now, the tool that I use a lot, and in fact it was Andy Hockley who introduced this tool to me, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It's a brilliant tool. It's called the Student Client Journey, which I don't know if you've heard of. It's a tool used in relationship marketing. Relationship marketing is all about the importance of creating a relationship with your students and your clients, developing it, and looking after your students as they spend time with you in your language teaching organization. And what it suggests that you do is that you break down the time that your student spends with you into different manageable stages. Yeah? So in our case, for me, these are the very logical stages. Yeah? So you've got the stage before your students or clients sign up for a course, before they contract your services. Then you've got the actual signing up for a course. You've got the stage when they're actually studying with you, so during the course. And then also importantly, you've got when the course has finished and how you continue your relationship with these people after the course is actually finished. Now, the idea is what you should need to do with this tool is you need to take each stage and at each stage ask yourself a series of questions which will help you to determine what information, what you need to communicate to the students at each of these stages. So what it's helping us to do is to select the what we need to communicate and when we need to communicate it. Yeah? So what we need to do here is, the idea is that you think about the students' actions, their motivations, questions and barriers at each of these stages. Now, what do we mean by this? Okay. What we mean by this is, by actions, we mean, okay, what is the student or the client doing at this stage? So let's take as an example the first stage, which is before a student or a client has signed up for a course with you. Yeah. So what is the student doing at that stage? What's the client doing at this stage? Well, I think we can imagine that, okay, they've decided that they, for whatever reason, need to sign up to study English or whatever language it is. And maybe what they're doing is they are comparing different language schools in the area where they live to see what the different options are. Or maybe they're looking at the different language schools near where they work. Maybe people are looking for a language school that is open on a Saturday morning or late at night. Or they're looking for a language school that offers a specific type of exam preparation courses. Or maybe they're looking for something that is for a specific needs program. What are they doing? They're probably talking to other people that they know, friends, relatives. They're looking for recommendations. If they're a training manager in a company, then they're probably talking to other training managers. They're looking for recommendations. They're looking for referrals. They're looking they're finding out how much courses are costing, about the different options, etc. So basically, they're doing lots and lots of different research. Yeah. And then you need to move on to motivations. So motivations, what is motivating the student or the client at this stage? So why are they doing this? Why are they looking for what the different options are around them? Does anybody want to contribute to a possible reason why a student is looking for a language course? Maybe you could type something in the chat window. Any idea? Oh dear. Everybody else hear me? Alejandra is Typing? Okay. In case of your students for professional development. Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, so it's very important to know what's motivating people. Yeah. So professional development. So they're in jobs presumably, and they're looking to get better in English. So maybe for to get a better job, for promotion, to be able to perform better in their current jobs. Yeah. Anything else? I mean, there are lots of different reasons why people look for language courses. A lot of people will have the pressure that they need to pass an exam if they want to study abroad. Yeah, exactly, for exams. Yeah, IELTS, they need to get a certain band score on the IELTS exam in order to study in a university abroad. Yeah, or for a job. Yeah, maybe a job that they currently have that the boss has said that you need to speak better English, and then you could take part in international meetings. Teens who want to take an international exam, exactly. Yeah. I mean, in terms of training managers, they've often been told by the people above them that they need to find a course that will give them a good return on investment. They're looking for something that is going to help in a very efficient way to improve the level of English language competency for the people working in the company, so they can perform better in their jobs, but in an affordable way. Yeah? And they don't want to have issues with people not attending classes. Yeah. There are lots of different reasons. So I think it's very important to think through the different reasons why somebody might be looking for, might be interested in studying at your language school. Yeah? What's motivating them? Yeah? And can you use that information? And then you've got the issue of questions. Yeah? So it's useful to ask yourself what uncertainties and other questions might the student have at this stage. Yeah? So what questions do you think they might be asking? They might be asking things like, okay, what happens? Do I have to pay for the course or the course at the beginning? What happens if I have to drop out because my job changes, or I have to move, or I don't like the class? Can I change classes? What happens if I'm in the wrong level? What happens if I'm ill? I don't know. There are lots of different things they could be asking, and I think that you need to identify as much as possible the questions that you think. It's almost like role playing. You have to put yourself into the profile of the sort of language student who would come and study in your school or trainer, and ask yourself, what questions will they need to answer? What sort of things do they want to know? Yeah. So, for example, in the case of a training manager, if what happens if they need to close a class? What happens if the attendance isn't good? Can they cancel classes? Can they recuperate classes? A whole series of things like that. Yeah? And then finally, you need to ask yourself about the barriers. Yeah? Now, barriers, what are the obstacles preventing students and clients from moving on to the next stage, which in our case here, the first stage, is what's preventing them from actually signing up for a course or signing a contract. So you need to ask yourself, well, can they pay for the course on the website? Can they pay online? Can they pay by bank transfer? Are the opening hours where people can come into the school conducive for people coming in and signing up at different hours of the day, or is it very restrictive? So is somebody coming by the school but they can't actually sign up because the office hours aren't wide enough to cater for these people? These sort of issues that you need to think of. So I think for me it's very, very useful to think about these different stages and ask myself these questions, because then I can select exactly what it is that I know I want the students, my clients, to know. It sort of sifts out the information, the critical information from slightly irrelevant noise, which is just distracting. And by doing this, I think it's very, very effective to ask yourself these questions with other people that are involved with dealing with your students and your clients, because it won't just be you talking to your students and your clients. There'll be your receptionist, the people who answer the telephone, marketing and sales teams, the teachers. So it's very important that everybody is involved in answering these questions. And by doing that, if you can actually get everybody involved, you're actually beginning to create a communicative strategy. It's the beginnings of what could be a very nice strategy in terms of working out what it is we want to communicate, how it's going to be communicated, and who's going to communicate it. Yeah? Which I think is very effective. For me, it's been very, very useful to work out what I need to communicate and when. And I found it very useful. So I wanted to share that with you. So I suggest that what you do after the session, if you're interested, is choose a different stage and work out for yourselves what it is. Go through these different points here, the actions, motivations, and questions and barriers for your context, and see if this helps you to sort out what information you need to provide to communicate to your students and your clients, and when, and how as well. Now, of course, communication is not just about communicating information. Communication, for it to be effective, is a lot more than that. So this is the second thing I wanted to talk to you about today, that it's very important to remember that communication is a very human process. And for people to communicate effectively, I think it's very important to apply the principles of emotional and social intelligence competences to communication. Now, what do I mean by that? Emotional intelligence competences are competences that enable you to be aware of your own emotions and manage them. And why is this so important? Now, from this little picture here, which I love, moods are contagious. Yeah? If you're in a good mood and you're having a good day, you will transmit that to anybody you communicate with. Be them students, teachers, parents, it doesn't matter who. You can see and feel, I think, happy, cheerful people. And it's wonderful being surrounded by a happy, cheerful person who's on top of the world. You want to listen to what they're saying. You want to communicate with them because they send off these very positive vibes. But the same is very, very true when we're not having the best of days, when we're not. And of course we have bad days and we can be in bad moods and things happen which make us irritable. The important thing, I think, is to be very aware of how we feel. And if we're not having a bad day, if we're not having a good day, sorry, if we're having a bad day, that we need to remember that maybe it's not the best moment to communicate with certain students and clients, depending on what you have to talk to them about. Maybe it would be a good idea to postpone certain conversations or to have them another day. Or at the very least, what you do need to do, I think, is be aware of how you feel about the effects that could have on the people you're going to talk to, and try and bring those emotions under control, and be aware of how you're feeling, what it's doing to your body language, and how you're communicating with people. And I think what's very interesting as well is this isn't just limited to talking to people in a face-to-face context. I work in an online context, and a lot of the communication I have with clients and students is by email, where we don't actually see each other. But for me, it's so incredibly obvious when somebody is not having a good day, just by the way they express themselves in writing. So if you're not having a good day and you're writing an email to your students or your clients, you're having to communicate something, it's always good to let that email, if possible, sit for a while and look at it maybe a little bit later before you click on the send button. Yeah? So those are emotional intelligence competences. Now, The social intelligence competences are competences that enable you to be sensitive to other people's emotions and manage them. So rather than just being aware of how you feel, it's about being aware of how the people you're talking to feel, and learning to manage the way you communicate according to how you think the other person or other people are feeling. Now, there are 3 different ways you can do this to break this down to something that's practical. It's very, very effective to communicate hope to people, to try to communicate hope. And in our context, that's very much about why are the students, the clients that we work with, why are they studying with you? Now, what are they doing in your language teaching organization? You know, what is the purpose or vision for them of the course? Yeah? If you can tap into what is motivating them emotionally, then it connects with people. It creates this sense of meaning and hope. And I find it fascinating. There's a lot being written at the moment about the importance of tapping into emotional motivators. And according to the research, when companies or language teaching organizations, doesn't matter what, connect with customers' emotions, the payoff can be very, very high. Yeah? And the idea is that emotional motivators drive consumer behavior. So if you can understand what is motivating your students, if you can tap into that, it's a very powerful piece of information to have and to work with. Now, these examples you can see on your screen now, what these are their 9 emotional motivators, which apparently affect customer value across lots and lots of different categories. They're common values. So I don't know if you think these would be relevant or could be relevant to your students, your clients, but we have things like stand out from the crowd. So do you think that people studying at your school, some people studying at your school, are studying English because it can help them stand out from the crowd, to be somebody? Or do you think maybe that they're doing it so they can feel a sense of belonging, to be part of a community, maybe your language school community, to be the person that they want to be? They aspire to be this person who has a high level of English, because they want to feel secure, because they're maybe not speaking English well, not communicating effectively, not having good English level, makes them feel insecure, because they want to succeed in life, and succeeding in life is tantamount to communicating well in English, and that's part of it. Feel a sense of thrill, feel a sense of freedom. Is communicating, learning English, and having a high level of English going to give people a sense of freedom, a sense of well-being, having confidence in the future? Do you think, I mean, you can imagine everybody will have their own emotional motivator, but you can imagine how some of these are common to people, and that by learning what they are and using them, what I think very definitely will help you to communicate with your students and your clients, because you're communicating on a level that inspires them. So if you were to choose any one of those, which one would you choose as being, you think, most relevant to the students that you teach? Could you type one into the chat section, the one that you think is most relevant? Succeed in their profession. Okay, yeah. You obviously deal, Alejandra, with people who working people, professional people, yeah, and succeeding in big business is very important. A sense of belonging, that's interesting as well. You teaching company, yes. Olga, what about you? Do you have an opinion about what you think is maybe the emotional motivator which affects most the students that you work with succeed in life? Okay. I think it's very interesting working with the way people feel. And I think it can make a big difference to how effectively we communicate with students. Okay, and then there are other aspects of social intelligence competences. Another one is communicating compassion. Now, by compassion, I don't mean feeling sorry for people. I mean showing that you care about them. People like to feel that you care about them. And I think you can definitely demonstrate that to people. I mean, just silly things like remembering students' names can make a massive difference to how they feel. Remembering something about their life. It's even if you're communicating somebody via email, rather than just launching straight into the information you need to communicate, introducing that with just a little bit of chit-chat, general chit-chat. It can be on a massive scale, sending it to lots of different people, but it can make all the difference to how somebody reads an email, to introduce that little bit of personal chit-chat about the weather or what's happening in an area of the world, or something cheerful, something that makes people feel as though you care about them, yeah? About how they've celebrated the weekend or a holiday or whatever. And then finally, the importance of being mindful. Now, this whole thing about mindfulness is very popular at the moment. I think this picture is great for depicting exactly what being mindful is. I'm sure you've been in a situation when you've been communicating with somebody where it's been very obvious that person is not there, is thinking about 10 trillion other things, and is not there in the conversation with you, engaged with you, listening to what you're saying. And for me, there's nothing worse. I think it's rude, it's obvious, and it really doesn't make you feel good about yourself to have to talk to somebody who's not actually listening to you. And again, I think it's very, very obvious. So I think it's very important to, when you're communicating with people, to actually be there in that moment. And if you can't be there because you have to do something else, maybe it's wise to say, okay, can I talk to you tomorrow or in an hour's time or something, when you know that you can be mindful, you can pay attention to what that person is saying. Because I think it's very detrimental to have a conversation with somebody or try to communicate with somebody when you're not fully there, because it's not going to have the required outcome that you would like. Okay. So for me, those are the two things that I wanted to share with you in terms of how I try and make communication more effective. I use the tool, the client-student journey. And also I try and remember all the time to be emotionally and socially aware and intelligent in terms of my communication with students and clients. And I wanted to finish this webinar by talking about the importance of feedback and reflection. Now, as Peter Drucker said, follow effective action with quiet reflection, and from quiet reflection will come even more effective action. Interestingly, I gave this talk not so long ago in a conference in Barcelona, an ELT conference, and somebody came up to me afterwards, and it was very interesting because she explained to me that she's been trying to improve communication in her language teaching organization, and that applied a lot of what that I've been talking about today, and about how are they going to communicate, when, who, etc. But she said, "Oh, but it's not working very well. It's not working." And so I said, "But but have you stopped and brought everybody back together to talk about it? And she said no. And I think the important thing about communication for it to be effective is that it has to be an ongoing, constantly reflecting, iterative process in which we try and improve the way we're communicating with our students and clients. We set a little roadmap. We do this, but then we have to come back and reflect all together about how effective what we have done has been. And that's the only way we can learn. And it also reminds people about the importance of doing this as well. So it's very important, I think, to reflect at regular intervals on how effective we are communicating with our students and our clients. Now, there's obviously two ways you can do this very easily. Well, one particularly, which is through formal feedback, through your typical end of course questionnaires, which, because you're designing them, you can ask specific questions about specific areas of communication to find out how effectively you think you have communicated. And in fact, at the end of our online courses, we send out online questionnaires. And it was very interesting for me on our online courses. One of the things that I know people like very, very much is a whole series of extra tools and resources that students have access to in addition to the course material. And I know this from presentations I give to potential clients. But what transpired in the feedback was that nobody was using, or very few people were actually using, these resources and these tools. And I suddenly realized that even though I thought it was incredibly obvious that these tools and these resources were there and that people could find them and use them, that maybe that wasn't the case. So by finding out this then, through a process of reflection, has then changed how I communicate and what I communicate to students during the course to remind them. So now I incorporate reminding different components of these additional resources and tools that they can use. And then we measured that in the next set of feedback we got back and found that there was a significant difference. So these sort of things, formal feedback can be very, very useful for this. But also, obviously, informal feedback, I think, can be very useful as well. Informal feedback, for me, is unsolicited feedback. It's a feedback that just you bump into a student, you're talking to a training manager about something on the phone, and they just give you feedback. It's spontaneous feedback that very, very useful information, which can quite often give you information into, I think, maybe the second part of how we communicate in terms of how emotionally and socially intelligent we're being in communication. Now, what I think is very important with both types of feedback is that it is shared between everybody that is involved with communicating with the students, because it's not just you. If you just keep it to you as a manager, then it's not going to be very successful. So you might have a marketing and sales team which will be involved in, especially communicating with the students and clients before the course, before signing up for the course, and that the information they communicate has to be the same with what the students are going to experience, obviously, on the course. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of disappointments and people not being very happy. Obviously, different managers, ADOSs, academic managers, admin staff, receptionists, very, very critical people, I think, in communicating with students. Teachers, obviously, in the classroom. Technical staff, if that's appropriate for you as well. And you also, I think it's very important to share the feedback you've got from your students and clients with these people. But I also think it's very important to ask for feedback from these different people as well about the communication process and how effective they think it is. You get this nice, almost 360-degree type feedback. And by doing that, you're creating this communicative strategy which you're working on as a team, and can then, if you get it right, be very, very effective. But I think in order to get it right, it requires people to, it has to evolve, and it has to be a very, very inclusive. It has to involve all the different people. involved in communicating with the students and clients. I think that's very important. So, I think we've actually come to the end of the webinar. Just to summarize, I think there are a lot of reasons for communication breaking down with students and clients, and a lot of these reasons are things that you can do very little about, but I think it is important to be aware of them. But I think you can become more effective in how you communicate with your students and clients by using tools like the client journey, which will help you to select what information to give when and how. I think if you remember the importance of using emotional and social intelligence competencies to make communication personal and meaningful, you'll find that you communicate much more successfully, much more effectively. And remember that nobody ever gets 100% right, but we will improve and get better.
And thank you.
The more we reflect and ask for feedback from our students and clients and other people that we're working with.
Thank you very much, Fiona. It was, I think it was really interesting. And thanks, Alejandra and Olga, for your interest and for your comments. Any questions for Fiona before we wrap up for the day?
In the whole idea of exploring emotion and motivators, this is an article from the Harvard Business Review. There's a link there to it, which is very interesting, I think. If you're interested in exploring a little bit more of this idea of the customer journey, this is a very inspiring article, again, from the Harvard Business Review. It's about a completely different industry and company. It's about a company called Longevity, I think it's pronounced, in the United States that sells solar panels, but it's inspiring. I think probably as language teaching organizations.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time and patience, and thanks for coming. We'll have another webinar, LAMSIG will have another webinar in May with Liam Brown. I can't tell you the title of it yet because he hasn't told me what the title will be, but if you follow our website or follow our Twitter account or the Facebook page, you'll have much more information before the time. So thanks very much for coming, and thank you, Fiona.